time of the times took place by a kind of evolutionary process without human conscious intention. In this sense, human conscious intention. I was amazed that people would go into the commercial world, so that by the time of the times took place by a kind of
And my apology to you, the listeners. We seem to be having just a slight bit of problem with the tape there. In this week 2 of our presentation of the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry. We'll be back to the program in just a moment. I'm sure we can fix it up. In the meantime, it's movie giveaway time. Yes, movie giveaway time. Each week here on WRPI, we give away 10 pairs of tickets. We have a winner.
About human conscious intention. In this sense, human conscious intention.
Again, our
amazed that people would go into the commercial world, so that by the time of the times took place, the time of the 40s. But I did know in great historical process and into the larger destinies of the planet. And so by the time of the late 30s, into the 40s, I studied history, and then I knew I had to go to China, I had to go to Asia, I had to get some sense of what was happening there, but always with the sense of a rethinking of the human venture at its most basic level. And I didn't really come to that until somewhat late in life, in the 60s, when I really... it was Teilhard de Chardin who got me beyond the religious answers. Well, he just become a religious person somehow. From him I learned, one of the most important things is that there's a spirit dimension to the universe from the beginning, and everything has a spirit dimension, a psychic spirit dimension. And that was, in a certain sense, I had never fully understood that before, nor had I fully understood that the evolutionary story and the human story were a single story. So that, and then he got me out better than I'd ever gotten out of the redemption mode of religion into a creation mode of religion, so that I could begin to think through the meaning of the world on its own basis and the evolutionary sequence. And then I began to see that if we were going to do anything, we had to work out of an understanding of the evolutionary sequence, and that would have to supply the dynamic. But a person had to understand how precious that was imperiled, and that would require more than the heroism that you need in war, the heroism that you need in doing any of the traditional things. It required a certain type of dedication that people like John Muir found it in people like Wallace Stegner. We found it in some of the people like David Brower, particularly, and the other Edward Abbey. These are people that began to see how things are. And then Robinson Jeffers, the poet, who gave expression to this, he had the most powerful expression in poetry, probably of any American poet. So that it is in some of the poetry, this particularly in John Muir, so that a person can get entry into this through people, some of the literature, through Muir, Jeffers, David Brower, these particularly, and then there are some of the others that escape my mind right now, but there are a fair number of people that are doing this heroic type of work.
It almost seems as if the mind has to be opened up to embrace a much larger arena of concern before we can begin to respond at the level of heroism that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because Teilhard seemed to have provided for you, among others, but Teilhard provided a way of seeing the human and the universe as an integral reality, which enabled you to overcome the discontinuity which was taught between the human and the natural world.
But the difficulty is almost a total reversal of values. That's the real difficulty, because it's not the bad people that are doing the damage, but the good people. So our whole structure of ideals has to be changed. Formerly, the heroism was in accord with the ideals of the society.
This concludes Side A. Please fast forward and turn the tape over for the continuation of
Moved in.
Just a moment, and that is the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry. We are listening to the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry, the first of a 4-part series, or possibly 5-part series, in anticipation of his appearance at a very, very special presentation, the 23rd Annual E.F. Schumacher Lectures, The Commons, Rights, and Responsibilities. It will feature Thomas Berry, Peter Barnes, and Andrew Kimbrell. It's Saturday, October 25th, 2003, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the First Congregational Church, Main Street, Stockbridge, Massachusetts. If you're going to go, registration is recommended. You can reach the E.F. Schumacher Society at area code 413-1757. Their website is www.smallisbeautiful.org. You can email them at efssociety@aol.com. It's now just about 5 minutes before 1 here in the studios of WRPI, and probably where you're listening as well. Well, as you heard there, and I wish you hadn't, there is still another 45 minutes to this week's cassette tape of the program, and we will listen to it. My good friend Gary Goldberg has very graciously given up some of his time so that we may continue with the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry. Sorry about we had a little bit of a gap in the tape there, folks. Wear and tear, I guess you would say. In the background is the Kronos Quartet from their CD, Night Prayers. The number here is 27. We'll be back in just a moment for another 45 minutes, the wrap-up of this week's presentation of the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry. Stay tuned.
Moved into the proper direction, like take the Christian ages, the ideal of the martyr, the idea of the heroic missionary, that was all there. And a person could follow out the ideals of goodness. The difficulty is that coming to America, when the Europeans came to this country, they assumed the ideal of occupying this country and the mission of exploiting this country. That was their ideal. And that was for the benefit of the entire human community, for our benefit, the benefit of others. So it wasn't simply for their own benefit, although it was a mixed effort, so to speak. But that idea of manifest destiny, we assume manifest destiny. That was the thing to do. Heroic was to conquer the North American continent, to go out and take possession, to overcome the animals, to overcome the hardship, to conquer the desert, to climb the mountains, and all of that. And then later the heroic people that put the railroads across the continent, all that assumed heroic dimensions. But it was all devastating. And the religious ideal of conquering religiously, that was an ideal that was already distorted. So you had religious ideals distorted, you had the commercial ideals distorted, and all these under the guise of doing heroic goodness.
Would you say that the ideals themselves were flawed from the beginning, or that the human species, over this period of development, went through a change, and so the ideals, formerly good ideals, now became destructive ideals?
I think that the ideals in their archetypal structure were basically good and had their good manifestations, but that they became distorted, became pathological. Like take the Spanish conquest of South America. It was a distorted thing to move in on these poor Indians and to conquer them, suppress them, and all that. That was a distorted religious ideal.
This goes back to your point of the millennial drive. In a certain sense, this is a profound distortion of an originally valid ideal. This notion of the millennium at a spiritual level,
Yeah.
but then when it became a historical drive that humans were going to accomplish, we have this distortion. One of the other ideals that you've talked about is celebration, and the way in which the path to fulfillment for a human includes celebration. And this would also be then an ideal that's been distorted by the commercial enterprise.
Yeah, that's one of the things, one of the most necessary things, and perhaps the central thing is, how do we celebrate? What are we excited by and think is a glorious moment of our existence? When we dance and sing or have a kind of an ecstatic mode of experience that is associated with dance that's not just simply dance, but the ecstatic type dance, or excitement that goes with such transforming music. We all have had that experience of glorious music that just elevates us into such a superb experience of a type of fulfillment. We all have this type of thing. Now, I am suggesting that the thing that we need now is to learn how to celebrate the Ecozoic era some way. But I think that our liturgies must include celebration of the transformation moments that I've mentioned earlier. That the great transformation moments need to be celebrated, but particularly the movement into the Ecozoic era. But in general, the best way to appreciate our times is to appreciate these great creative experiences of an earlier period, and then to be able to see that our task is the task, the intention, in other times took place by a kind of evolutionary process without human conscious intention. In this sense, human conscious intention toward an Ecozoic era is part of and in continuity with the whole evolutionary dynamic. And so this represents a transformation of a change of phase, as you've expressed, a change of phase of the evolutionary process.
Well, the celebration then would be simultaneously a moment of fulfillment and part of what evokes the Ecozoic era.
Yeah.
In your thinking. But celebration as it's happening, taking place in our society today, would be a distortion of that. And is the celebration or the entertainment world, is that simply a trivialization of this dynamic, or is it rather deeper, and is it actually drawing us into the destruction itself?
Well, it's drawing us into a greater participation in the contemporary process, but a person would have to say, though, that it keeps us psychically alive to some extent. Like I talk about the exaggerated attention to sports, where we beat the drums and everybody gets hyped up and shouting and all that at, say, the Super Bowl, which you probably know is the biggest single celebration of the year in America. It's a kind of a ritual, and it's integral with and principally supported by the corporation establishment, for the corporations, to benefit by. They're the ones that finance it, they're the ones that preside over it to a certain extent. So a person would say that it keeps people alive, so to speak, and until they're a distraction, in a way. But it's simply that it's better that there be celebration probably than there not be celebration, but there is the fact of how do you transfer this to a more creative context.
Hey, I appreciate the positive part of that, but still, isn't it part of the distortion of the millennial drive, in that if the corporations are using celebration as a way of captivating contemporary consciousness, isn't that all part of a movement to distort the whole human enterprise into advancing this destruction? Isn't that really what's taking place?
Well, that's really what's taking place. How to stop that or change it. The person doesn't want to stop it exactly, but to transform it into a creative type experience. So right now it's just confirming people and into what they're doing. But if that's not done, it would turn into a possibly more destructive way. In other words, it could go, human energies could go into a more destructive kind.
Before, Thomas, you used the adjective demonic, and as you said, it's a heavy word, but nevertheless, when you step back, as you have done, and examine the whole human enterprise, it seems to be the case that right now we have a civilization where, especially young people, are given a profoundly distorted view of what it means to be human and what it means to be a hero. And then when we look at what captivates their attention, say the Super Bowl, and their whole lives are wrapped up with trying to get to the Super Bowl, say.
Yeah.
This isn't accidental. This has been worked out by the corporations as a way of fixating our attention. So it seems it brings to mind again this notion of a deeply negative pathological condition of our society.
Yeah.
And it's in a certain sense a distortion of some very profound energies.
Well, that's precisely the thing. You have even the Olympics, which is this whole world sports event celebrated. And again, the corporations backing the whole process. So that it is an indication and a validation of the fact that whatever humans do, celebration is kind of the ultimate consecration. Celebration and consecration go together. It's of the human process. That's why they have a kind of, it's a sacred thing. This enters into the world of the sacred. So in that sense, it does show that if we're going to have an ecozoic era, it cannot be done without a ritual, celebratory dimension and identity and consecration. Now, just how to bring that about. But the event, an age itself is a celebration. In other words, it's not that the ecozoic era we celebrated, we have to identify it with celebration. That the ecozoic era is celebration of existence and community relationships of the human and the other components of the planet Earth as a single sacred society. And that's why I say that we need to think about the children, and we need to be concerned with all the children, say, of the North American continent. We need to be concerned with the children of the whole planet. The children of the trees, the children of the birds, the children of the animals, of the fox, the bear, the children of the fish, the children of the whole living world. And the human children are a single community that needs to go into the future as a single sacred community. So when we can think of the future in terms of the children, think of the children as including all the children, then we have things in their proper dimension. Now, till we do that, if we just think of the human children, we won't save the human children. We want an ecozoic era for the humans. That distorts the whole thing. What we need to do is to appreciate that there's a single sacred society. There's a single childhood community. It's not a human childhood community and a childhood community of the other modes of life. It's a single childhood community that constitutes the new generation. And so the primary work of this generation, I would say, is to prepare the next generation to go into the future as a single community. The poem I will read now, or the verse, I don't know if it's a poem exactly, but the verse was written on the morning following a presentation of the Winter Solstice concert by Paul Winter in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And the year was in the 1980s. It's entitled Morningside Cathedral, and the concert was given in the cathedral in the dark of December, and it was a rather overwhelming presentation, depicting the darkness of a solstice experience. The title, Morningside Cathedral. A barbarous setting for winter music, Gothic, out of the dark Eurasian continent. Vast, turbulent. Limestone columns, stone locked into stone by the heavy pull of gravity, lightly arching into the distant sky. Dark. Dark as a cave, as a kiva. Music, dark, rumbling sound, drums, strings, winds, organ, whale song from the deep of the sea, wolf's cry from the forest. A pathos of earth. Gothic dark, drumbeat, heartbeat of a planet poignant as eternity come into time, time resonant with eternity. Human cry, wolf cry, whale cry, cathedral cry. Cry of the sun sinking into darkness. Not now ritual terror of a time when the sun's conquest was assured. Now terror of a death darkness descending over the life planet. Our planet, our little Christmas tree ornament hung in the sky, our little watering hole. Is it drying up, or dare we drink its waters, breathe its air? We flee. Where to? Back into the night of nights before creation flared forth its trillion-degree sunburst. Back into the cave. Back into the forest, to the guardian spirit of the North American continent. We have heard in this cathedral box passion the lamentations of Jeremiah, ancient experiences of darkness over the earth, light born anew. But now, darkness deeper than even God can reach with a quick healing power. What sound? What song? What cry appropriate? What cry can bring a healing when a million-year rainfall can hardly wash away the life-destroying stain? What sound? Listen. Earth sound. Listen. The wind through the hemlock. Listen. The owl's soft hooting in the winter night. Listen. The wolf. Wolf song. A cry of distant meanings woven into a seamless sound. Never before has the cry of the wolf expressed such meaning on the winter mountainside, morningside. This cry, our revelation as the sun sinks lower in the sky over a wounded world. The meaning of the moment and the healing of the wound are there in a single cry, a throat opened wide for the wild sacred sound of some great spirit. Wakantanka, Orenda, the Manitou, hovering over the darkening earth. A Gothic sound come down from the beginning of time. Only humans could hear. Patterns too fixed in human frame for the healing remedy of earth language. I'll break the pattern of the little red writing. I'll see the wolf as guardian spirit, as savior guide. Our Jeremiah, telling us not about the destruction of Jerusalem or its temple. Our Augustine, telling us not about the destruction of Rome and civilization. Our Bach, telling us not about the passion of Christ in ancient times, but about the passion of earth in our times. The wolf, our earth, our Christ, ourselves. The arch of the cathedral itself takes on the shape of the uplifted throat of the wolf, lamenting our present destiny, beseeching humankind to bring back the sun, to let the flowers bloom in the meadows, the rivers run through the hills, to let the earth and all its living creatures live their wild, fierce, serene, and abundant life. one of the things we might think about is the North American continent. Sometimes we talk about the planet, sometimes we talk about the universe, the world, nature. Sometimes we talk about local regions and so forth. One of the fascinating dimensions of the planet Earth are the continents. The planet Earth has many divisions, but one of the most clearly established are the continental divisions. And the continental divisions, as we have them now, originated some 200 million years ago. Maybe a little more, but there's around that time, all the continents were one continent. They had been separated before, but they had come together in what was known as Pangaea. And the North American continent drifted off to the northwest. It broke off of what is now the big curve of North Africa. And it swung somewhat like on a hinge from what's now Northern Europe. Greenland is a part of the North American continent. So South America went off to the south. And there was the person would say that there was no connection between North and South America until recently. No more than, I believe, some 10 to 20 million years, maybe longer than that. But the life forms of South America are more different from the life forms of North America than the life forms of the North American continent are with the European and Asian landmass. The Eurasian landmass and the North American go together. These are in the northern temperate zone for the most part, but the development of North America and South America by humans were one of the last. Modern humans existed in Africa and Asia and Europe for the past 200,000 years. Human types existed for maybe 1.5 million years, what's called Homo erectus, but not on North America. Now, it was only some 40,000 years ago that humans came to North America or Australia. Australia, North America, South America are the last areas to be occupied by humans. I go into this because North America was, in its primordial grandeur, perhaps it might say, relatively, completely untouched by humans until very recently. The last 40,000 years, a person might consider as recent in geological or biological time. And the Europeans came here only 500 years ago. So it's a very brief while that humans have been on the North American continent. So it had some of the innocence or the integrity of the natural world. Even during the period when the indigenous peoples came over from Asia, perhaps 30,000 years ago, possibly 40,000 years ago, very unlikely that it's longer than that. I would suggest 30,000 years ago as a time period when they occupied this continent. And they lived here during this period. Now, during this period, very little damage was done to the continent. But then 500 years ago, Europeans came. And we need to think about this because Europeans considered themselves the most valid religious people of the world consider themselves the most humanist. They consider themselves the most advanced in governments, in benign governments. In just about every way, they consider themselves the best and the finest phase of the human endeavor. But they came here, and in a period of, say, since the time of Jamestown, if we think about North America, there was Spanish settlement in Florida earlier, but we just take 1600 as the time when the settlements began. 1600 takes it 2,400 years ago. Now, in those 400 years, this continent has been just devastated in many ways. Only 5% of the primordial forests survive. There's been tens of thousands of dams. I believe I've seen the figure 50,000 dams of the streams. The soil's terribly depleted. We're losing 4 to 6 billion tons of topsoil every year, according to official government figures. And a person can go on with the dark side. But a person has to ask, how is it that the wisest and best people of the world did such damage in such a brief while to such a magnificent continent? It's something that baffles the imagination. So I think it's an appropriate thing to think about. And the lesson of it is, very briefly, that good people do devastating things. They came here for good purposes. They came here to relieve the human oppressions that they experienced in Europe. They came here to establish a way of life for themselves. But they had not the slightest conception of joining the North American continent, of joining the community here. So that what happened is a discontinuity, a dislocation of one in relationship to the other, of the natural world and the human world. And so it's a question of people seeking to do good, but not knowing what was good and being driven to terrible destructive practices. Now, what was the problem? People with a sense of religion coming from a verbal revelation came into contact with the people that perceived the pervasive spirit, the great spirit in the natural world. People that had a sense of the exalted nature of the human, in contradistinction with the natural world, came to contact with a people that talked about the natural world in terms of all my relations. People who had immunity from disease, certain diseases, came into contact with the people that had no immunity from these diseases of diphtheria and, smallpox to some extent. The Europeans have begun to develop a certain immunity. And people with a literate mode of life to people who had not developed writing, except in a minimal way in South America. So the idea of developing a continental community was something that was not available to them at that time. And so the technologists had developed, people with technological and scientific skills had come into contact with a people that had only some brief beginnings of science and technology, although they did have agricultural skills of a high order. Whereas the Europeans had developed more domesticated animals, the people on this continent had almost no domesticated animals. They didn't have the chicken, they didn't have the horse, didn't have the pig or the cow or the sheep or the goats. They had the dog. South Americans had animals such as the alpaca, the vacuna, and the llama. So they had the three animals of that nature. North America had no domesticated animals, particularly. So this was a disturbance to the biosystems of the planet. The Europeans, they brought many of their own biological species to this continent, but to a certain extent these were turned into a disturbance of the continent, particularly when they became feral, when they became wild. The wild pig became terribly destructive, and some of the other grasses that they brought became a difficulty. So what we need to do, it seems to me, is to rethink how we entered into the North American continent, and rather than thinking simply on a global scale, I think there are some advantages in thinking through some of our problems simply on a continental scale.
And let's bring down the music. Bring up my voice. Good afternoon. This is WRPI Troy, where you are listening to the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry, week 2 of what will be at least a 4-part series, in anticipation of the appearance, one of the very rare public appearances, of Father Thomas Berry this October 25th, 2003, at the E.F. Schumacher Lectures, the 23rd Annual E.F. Schumacher Lectures, program entitled The Commons, Rights and Responsibilities, featuring Father Thomas Berry, Peter Barnes, co-founder of Working Assets Long Distance, owner of Who Owns the Sky, and a panel of respondents including Andrew Kimbrell. Right now, a quick public service announcement from WRPI Troy. Parent Leadership Training, October 20... In the background, the song is Kavakarat, track number 6 from the magnificent CD Night Prayers by the Kronos Quartet. It's been something of the background music for when my voice comes in this afternoon. We have just a little bit more to go with the week number 2 of the Collected Thoughts of Thomas Berry. It'll be some readings of poetry that Thomas Berry himself wrote. I want to thank my good friend Gary Goldberg